Good evening, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Ask Professor Paranormal. That's me. Just welcome the folks. I know there's some regulars here who come again and again, but I know that we've been getting a lot of views, which is great. In fact, I want to encourage everybody who's here with me tonight, or anybody who's watching the replay, to send the link to share the link with your friends. If anybody's interested in the paranormal at all. So please go ahead and pass it along. Don't forget to like and subscribe. It does help me down the road as well. We're trying to kind of get the word out on things. So I want to mention first something I'm going to mention again a couple times throughout the session. I will be giving a lecture this Friday evening. It'll be actually 7 p.m. Eastern, 4 p.m. Pacific. I'm going to be lecturing at the Rhine Research Center in Durham, North Carolina, but that will be webcast on Zoom as well. So if you go to the link I just put in, hopefully, I don't know, the link actually showed up there. Let's try that again. There we go. Yeah, showed up twice. Go to Rhine Online or just rhine.org and look at the events, or just wait because it has a kind of carousel and you'll see my lecture pop up there. It is about magic and parapsychology, as in, stage magic, kind of the coordinated history of the two. So that will actually be Friday night. And then that's the main thing I've got to announce right now. We only have a couple more sessions past this one coming up. I will be reporting on the last session of the year. I'll be talking about an investigation that I'm going to be doing in mid-December. I'm not going to talk about it right now. I will talk about it after we've actually done the investigation, just in case something kind of falls through. So I definitely will talk about that as well. All right. So I do have a question that came through from my buddy Dave Manganelli earlier. So a little background for those of you who might have missed last time when I actually told some ghost stories. And one of the stories I talked about was kind of an unusual circumstance back in the 1980s of a woman and her adult son living in a house south of San Francisco who claimed that they had a ghostly maid. They claimed that the house was messy. They'd leave the house, they come back, the house was clean and organized. Piles that were spread out were kind of coordinated and so on. So myself and a few people on my team, some of my folks, we went down there. We went into the house, watched them, they messed some stuff up, put some dirt out and so on. And then we stood outside the house for a couple of hours, all of us. Nobody was in the house at the time. Had people on different parts of the sides of the house, make sure there was nobody going in, and went back in. And it was as if the place had been vacuumed and swept. And by the way, and my friend Dave actually asked if there was any indication of where the dirt was. And the answer to that was no. We checked the vacuum cleaner bag. There was no new dirt in the vacuum cleaner bag. And, things that were spread out were organized and moved about. So his question, which is a really interesting question, and I do have a response to it, was, since most of the time when you read about physical activity, it's chaotic. It's sometimes destructive, things break, things stop working, that sort of thing. This is clearly not that kind of case. This is exactly the opposite of your typical poltergeist case. But we didn't think this was a poltergeist because, number one, nobody was present, and it really doesn't fit the model of the physical activity in poltergeist or living agent cases. The cases, for the most part, in poltergeistery are related to living people, not to ghosts. But if you look at what's reported around any physical activity with apparitions, with actual interactive consciousness, interactive ghosts, you do find a different story most of the time. Not all the time. And I suspect there's a reason why the chaos might happen too. So for example, a place that I've investigated for many years, I did a lot of work at, was the Banta Inn. It's out in Tracy, California. That's about an hour and a half east of San Francisco. Old place, built in the late 1800s. It was an inn, like a restaurant inn, stopping point for people going through California. It had a second floor originally, which was a bordello. And the second floor burned down in 1910, in a not so mysterious fire. But they rebuilt the place. In the 1960s or 50s and 60s, the owners included a guy named Tony Gukin and his wife being related to the original owners. And he died in 68, apparently at the restaurant, at the place. People started seeing him within a week. Most of the people who originally saw him were actually regulars. So I'm going to skip ahead a little bit. In the 1970s, and this is not unusual for a case of an apparition to evolve to a point where people may or may not see the apparition anymore or experience the apparition, but there's physical activity. It's as if the ghost has to learn how to do that. And there started being physical activity with the new owners that came in the 70s, Joan and her husband Dave Borland originally. When I went there in the mid 80s, the first time I heard about it from somebody I was working with who was related to one of the waitstaff, there was physical activity when I was there. I mean, there was physical activity between the mid 70s and continued into the 90s for sure. And the physical activity was never chaotic. Things were not breaking or being broken down. In fact, it was exactly the opposite. It wasn't that the place was getting cleaned up, but the physical activity matched some of the physical things that Tony Gukin did when he was alive, such as changing the music on the jukebox. At this point in the 80s, it was a CD jukebox. He often played Patsy Cline. That was his favorite. So the owners, when they put the new jukebox in, the CD jukebox, they made sure there was lots of Patsy Cline in there. People would play a song from a different artist, and it would switch automatically to Patsy Cline. The CDs were known to kind of flip on their own to the right CD, Patsy Cline. When he was alive, Tony used to keep the old cash register drawer open, which is not unusual in the older style registers. And he would line up the change in the drawer very neatly as kind of a nervous habit. So we heard that was happening on its own. And when I was there, I kind of messed up the change in the drawer, closed the drawer, waited a couple of minutes, opened it up, and lo and behold, it's in nice, neat rows. And that happened a lot. Glasses moving across the bar. I heard from some physicist who was there with his colleagues, and they watched something float across the room, a glass float across the room, again, landing without breaking. My very first thing I saw was an ashtray popping up off the bar a few feet, flipping over and slamming down back on the bar. It was a glass ashtray. It did not break. So from that case, from other cases I've had, and my reading in the literature, when there's a seemingly conscious entity, an apparition, the only way it's going to be chaotic or destructive is if the apparition either has it in for you, assuming they've learned how to do stuff, which doesn't seem to be the case for all ghosts, or I know of cases where things started out minor. There were minor movements. There were things that were kind of right in front of people's faces, but they were too afraid to acknowledge the activity. So eventually, things sometimes would be a little bit more destructive or loud or bangs to get their attention. In other words, if you ignore a 2-year-old, eventually that 2-year-old is going to have a tantrum. And in this case, it seems like sometimes ghosts act like 2-year-olds if they're being ignored. So I think the difference between, even though the woman and her son never saw an apparition there at their house, that seems to be the case. That fits more into the apparitional physical activity than it does into poltergeist activity, other kinds, which is the majority of physical activity, by the way. Yeah, Jody, I walked away from that case thinking, and I think we all just said, do you loan the ghost out? Can she come to our place? It'd be a really nice thing that would happen. What we need are a bunch of OCD ghosts who are willing to be in our homes and be physically active because they're going to make sure everything is perfectly neat. They might get mad at us if we mess things up too much, though, of course. Paul, yeah, I lectured last Saturday morning at the Laguna Woods Life After Life Club. They actually have a video channel on YouTube. So if you put in Life After Life Club or Laguna Woods or Laguna Life After Life Club, you'll see all their lectures they've had. and mine went up yesterday. So you can see the lecture I gave, which was on a few of my cases, including the Benta N, in fact. So if you want to see more about the Benta N, you can watch that lecture. There are some other lectures on various YouTube channels or interviews with me, because I've done a lot of podcasts, video podcasts, and other things, and more than a few lectures that have been put up on other sites as well. So there's plenty of Lloyd to go around, actually. And since I'm the only Lloyd Auerbach, apparently, you Google me, it's me. I've when I've gone for jobs, non-parapsychology jobs, I usually tell them, on my resume, I have something about parapsychology, because it makes no sense to not show that, because as soon as somebody Googles me, they're going to see all this other stuff, all of this stuff. So I don't really worry about that too much at this point. All right. I'll just wait for a moment to see if there are any questions. But I will also mention something else. I did see something posted on Facebook. It was an article in, I think it was the Daily Star? I'm going to take a quick look and see where it was actually posted here for a moment. But it was a very interesting, very odd, interesting article. And the headline simply is, "Ghosts are dying out because they only exist for 100 years, says paranormal experts." Say paranormal experts. It's from the Daily Star in the UK. And frankly, I don't, I've looked at the article. I'd like to see their actual report at some point, because frankly, I have a hard time with that. Partly because we have apparent conscious entities in some of the homes or buildings around Gettysburg. There is the Winchester Mystery House, which has one, no matter what you see they've made up a lot of stuff, or ghosts, a lot of stories about the Winchester House. The one ghost that was seen by maintenance people and security people over the years was communicated with by several mediums and psychics, is a guy named Clyde, who was the handyman during the construction of the building. And after, he worked for Sarah Winchester. He's been there for over 100 years. So ghosts don't vanish, except when you consider that people who are who are sitting around or sticking around here on the earth world, in the physical world, that there is someplace else to go, or some other step of existence in general. And some of them decide to move on or finish up with what they wanted to do in this physical world. They have stuck around for a while for whatever reason. The ghosts on the USS Hornet are there to make sure the Hornet stays in existence as a good museum. That's one of the reasons for them. So if they decide to move on, they'll move on. Not that there's a rule that 100 years is it. And so I take issue with that particular thing. And I think 100 years is a long time for somebody to stick around in a single place. So how do you know that the ghost didn't just leave that place and go somewhere else in the world? Because we know that ghosts can travel also. So, well, at least we have examples of that. So it's not a great story. All right, let's see here. So Stephen Smith, are you still on the board of the Yes, I'm still president of the Forever Family Foundation. In fact, we have a board meeting in a couple of weeks. We recently had a grief retreat, one of the 4 grief retreats a year that we do. We had one out here in the Bay Area in the weekend of the 18th of October, in fact. So I'm still active with them. I don't usually go to the grief retreats on the East Coast, mainly because of expense to the foundation. There's no point in having me there when there's someone else who could also kind of give a similar lecture to what I interact with folks. But yes, I'm on the foundation board. And for those of you who don't know about the foundation, foreverfamilyfoundation.org is the website. It's an organization, nonprofit, 501c3, all volunteer. Even the mediums don't get paid by the foundation. And we certify mediums. We have a testing protocol for that. They have to volunteer for the foundation in some way, shape, or form to stay certified. And the point of the organization is to work with evidential mediums in the family grieving process, hence the grief retreats, as well as the foundation also disseminates and supports information and evidence and research on survival of bodily death, life after death. So it's a great organization. You can join for free. Not a lot of organizations you can do that with. Okay, Jody recently saw a video on Dvorsky remote viewing mirror experiments. They use claim to. I don't know anything about the Soviet Union. That did not pop up in any of the information that we got from the Russians for our book ESP Wars. There were a lot of different attempts at doing psychic things in the Soviet Union. In fact, one of the reasons there was even a remote viewing program in the US is because it was thought the Russians, the Soviets, were actually having extreme success, which was actually propaganda. Didn't turn out that way. Ed May, who ran the Stargate program for a number of years, Joe McMoneagle, viewer number 001 for the program for Stargate, did go over there, got to know some of their Russian counterparts. This is after of course, after the fall of the wall, after the fall of the Soviet Union. And they're doing remote viewing similar to the way that we're doing it. So definitely nothing about that, but I'll have to ask Ed about that. The FFF has a recommended group of mediums. Any direct experience? Yes. I don't have experience with all the foundation mediums. But I have experience with a large, with a number of them, because I have either at conferences we've had in the past, because we used to do conferences, or the grief retreats that I've attended, or some other events that I've done with a few of them. I have found them to be truly evidential. They have different personalities naturally. So some of it may be their personality, the medium's actual personality, and how you feel about that. But if they've passed the testing protocol, we're real careful to make sure they truly can get good evidence to the people they work with. That does not mean, very important to know, that does not mean that a medium can absolutely connect with the person you want them to. It's not dial a spirit, unfortunately. Our mediums clearly explain a number of things before they start any of their group or individual sessions, including that very point. Part of it is who wants to talk to you, not just who you want to talk to. And I liken it to the idea of, back when we all had landlines, calling the home of a friend, and there was several people living in that home, a family, and we would just randomly call the house looking for our friend Bob. And I'd say, whoever picked up the phone, I say, is Bob there? Maybe Bob picks up the phone. That's great. Is Bob there? And they say, no, he's out. Or no, he can't come to the phone right now. That's pretty much what mediumship is. You may place the call through the medium to a person, deceased relative or friend or loved one, but for whatever reason, they are not available, or there's someone else who needs to talk to you, or who you need to hear from. So that's an important thing, because I've seen some really ridiculous commentary reviews of some of our mediums where the medium got bad review, even though the medium communicated with the person's father, and it was absolutely the father, and the person was, the sitter was saying, yeah, that's my dad, but she didn't want to talk to her dad. She wanted to talk to her mom. They get a bad review, and that's just not the way it works. It doesn't work that way, right? Let's see here. What do you think of ghost species? In some countries, ghosts have distinctive shapes. Yeah, there is a culture, a process that our perceptions are not just shaped by, let's say, the consciousness of the ghost, because this is a psychic process. If you were to see a ghost, you are not seeing that ghost with your eyes. You are picking up on a mental image the ghost is projecting, more or less. The same thing with anything, any voice related stuff, any smell related stuff. The perception is coming psychically. It's coming through as a visual, auditory, or otherwise, but it's still a psychic perception. There's two things that affect that visual. One is what the entity, how the entity thinks of themselves, their own self-image. There's a good reason why so many apparitions are seen by relatives after the person died, and they don't look as old as they were when they died. They don't look like as sick as they were when they died, if that's what happened. They look like they're in the prime of their lives. And that's because that's how we all think of ourselves. I'm 30, 32 maybe in my mind. Unfortunately, I didn't have a lot more hair, but my hair was darker at that point. I have an image of myself, and all of my imagery has myself with clothing on. That's the other thing. Apparitions are rarely ever seen naked, and that's because their self-image includes clothing. And that's why we have cases where the apparition may show up from day to day in different clothing, sometimes even different ages, for that matter. The other thing that affects what the ghost looks like is your spinning on my end. Let me just see here. Oh, there we go. Okay. Sorry about that, folks. And his power went out, so we're back. All right. So what I was talking about before this happened was in response to kind of how people see apparitions and how they might be different in different countries. So beside the self-image of the apparition, it's also how the receiver, that's us, processes that signal psychically and just in our perceptions. That is why some spirits are seen, sometimes apparitions are seen as shadowy figures, because the individual seeing the shadowy figure is not processing. Think of it as they're static in the way, so it's not in focus. But part of that also, in that processing, there are individual beliefs and biases that could have us reinterpret that signal, how we're getting it. So in a strong cultural belief that an apparition looks a certain way, it may not matter what the apparition themselves think of themselves. It's actually, we're interpreting that signal kind of like just in a different way. It also may be possible that apparition, having been from that culture, believes that's what ghosts look like, and that's their self-image after death. So there is all of that that's possible. Now, I see also that Mew asks, are they collective unconscious creations that turned into ghosts? That would be a thought form. And this is something that some folks in my field have looked at. We have really no way of knowing for sure if this is a real thing. But in some cultures, this is believed that if you put enough, such as Tibetan culture, if you put enough mental energy, mental effort into creating something that is conscious, that eventually that thing is a psychic projection and may actually at some point get some autonomy. So it's very, the question of whether or not it's a thought form technically is whether that thing is interactive. So if it's not interactive, we can still create these imprints that can be picked up as well. So going back here, let's see, why don't we see more disco fashion ghosts? Why are they always black or white? Well, they're not white or black Victorian dresses. It depends on the location. The guys on the Hornet are dressed in military outfits. They're either sailors or officers. So they're dressed appropriately for who they are or why they're there. The ghost of the Moss Beach Distillery, after getting fashion advice from a psychic years ago, suddenly stopped showing up in a 1930 bright blue dress. She was known as the Blue Lady. She started showing up in a short black cocktail dress. the little black dress, and has shown up in all sorts of other more modern outfits. It's not about Victorian stuff. If the person is a ghost who died not too long ago, well, Tony Guckin, who died when in 1968, was dressed in his normal clothing when people did see him. So it's really not about that, unless, of course, I guess the ghost was somebody when they were alive. They were a cosplayer, and their cosplaying was in a black or white Victorian outfit. Ghost stories, in the media are different than, of course, reality, what people have reported. So it just really depends. The disco thing, yeah, I don't know. I don't know. There might be people don't dress that way anymore, so that could be a big piece of it. And there may not be anyone from the disco era who died in that time and thought of themselves looking like that, who's still hanging around. Or if they are, they may be hanging around at places where they're not noticed. Let's put it that way. All right. And hi, Mariah, the paranormal concierge. Yeah, I didn't see your tulpa question, Mariah. But I was talking about thought forms in that sense. There is a question. I have talked about this before. John Sable, who is an archaeologist by training, but also does a lot of writing on the paranormal and has done a lot of investigations over the years, wrote a paper that I read last year, I think it was, raising the question. I've now heard the question from other people too, that when ghost hunters go into a place with their expectations and behaviors, do they leave an impression, an imprint behind? In other words, 5 years from now, is some other ghost hunting group going to come in and experience a ghost hunting group as the haunting? Certainly the emotions can affect the environment, because you can basically record over the previous imprints with your own human emotion and activity. So we have to be careful doing investigations to be as dispassionate as possible. But even so, we might leave stuff behind that the next group or next individual coming in to investigate, or the next people who live in that house, could experience the ghost hunter haunting the house. Now, those are not tulpas. Tulpas technically are kind of the ultimate of thought forms. That is, again, a Tibetan meditator who puts, or a group that puts enormous mental process and energy into creating something. It's not by accident in that sense. And whether there really are thought forms or not is a big question. But I've run into situations where one notable, which I've mentioned before, I met a channeler back in the 80s, back when channeling was really popular. And people were channeling, like, if you were Irish, the odds are you channeled somebody from 17th century Ireland for whatever reason. People channeled aliens. People channeled ancient gods, Atlanteans, most famous being Ramtha, supposedly channeling a 35,000-year-old Atlantean warrior prince. Nothing that you would give you ID in any respects. So I met this woman who was channeling Athena. And when Athena was present through this woman channel, I said, "Are you the Greek goddess Athena, the actual Greek goddess?" And the response was, "Great. No, there never were Greek gods. There never were gods. But I am the result of the belief in the concept and spirit of wisdom that the Greeks named Athena." So basically, she said she was a thought form, or at least that's what the channeled entity said. I don't know that there actually was any entity that was going through this woman, but it's really interesting that that was a response, because it made more sense that there was a Greek god than there was a Greek god coming through. All right. If people have different imaginations, how would a thought form exist? So that's a good question. We don't know exactly the mechanism that causes hauntings to happen, residual hauntings specifically. It does seem to connect to magnetic fields, but we still don't know the mechanism that this actually happens, why some places have imprints that are louder than others, or more specific than others. And it may just be that there are environmental factors, as there would be with hauntings in general, that allow that thought form to come to pass. Or maybe that person simply has the ability to actually create a thought form in some respects. There is a short mystery series. It's only three novels right now. Which is a really interesting mystery series. It's by Craig McDonald. If anybody here is a fan of Doc Savage or The Shadow or any of the other pulp characters that have been around forever, the first book of the series is called The Blood Ogre. And in this Savage, well, Doc Savage, not under that name, but Savage and his crew, The Shadow, Doc Savage's cousin, Patricia, they're all under different names now. They were created as thought forms by the writers. So apparently, Lester Dent, who created Doc Savage and the crew, had the special ability to create thought forms that were conscious. So did Walter Gibson, who created The Shadow. So it may just be that it's a special ability too. All right. Jody, if you survive, your wardrobe will be fat. I think it's important to know, all of us going in, that we can change our clothes and even our appearance. I will, in fact, have hair. I've decided after I die. Yeah. And Paul, if you become a ghost, first thing you'll do is haunt the skeptics. Make sure you go after the real deniers, and slap them upside the head a few times. Do things. This is one of those times that I think if you can learn to move objects, and I suggest you watch the movie Ghost again if you haven't seen it lately, but definitely learn to move objects when you die as quickly as possible, and then do simple things. One of the funniest stories I heard from Joan Borland, the owner of the Banta Inn, she had a couple, it was well known the place was haunted. And a couple of guys came in, bought a beer, sitting at the bar. She was behind the bar at the time. And they were making fun of everybody who believed there was a ghost there. Just like mercilessly. They were not just skeptics. They were just being asses, actually, about it. They had money in the bar in front of each of them. Joan said that a quarter in front of each of the two guys stood up on end, balanced on the edge. They saw that happen. They looked at each other and apparently ran out of the bar. I don't know that that's scary, but I guess when you don't believe that any of this is possible, just the littlest thing can do that for you. But I think that's really very, very amusing, actually. So, Paul, there's a thing you can do. Just do little things to them rather than big things. Be annoying as possible. Or better yet, do what Patrick Swayze's character did to Whoopi Goldberg's character in the movie, and sing a song over and over and over and over again. So just annoy them that way. Tina, if you're a ghost, you'll try to wear your Bad Music for Bad People shirt by the Cramps. That's good. That's good. Yeah. So, we don't really know all the rules. We don't know why some people get to stick around rather than others. It's not because of a curse or being stuck. If you're stuck, it's because you're sticking yourself. Doesn't seem to be any rule on that point. Certainly not a rule that you disappear after 100 years. But I can't imagine most people wanted to stick around in the same spot for 100 years. I can imagine them wanting to travel around the world for over 100 years, or maybe in my case, I'm going to go into space if I can. All right. So, yeah, definitely, Paul. Of course, the TV show Ghosts, those ghosts don't play by the rules of the experiences we hear about, but it's one of my favorite shows. The BBC show I watched, in fact, I ended up buying the show, most of the episodes. That went for 5 seasons. That was great. The American version is great. There's going to be an Australian version, which hopefully we'll get at some point too, which will have slightly different ghosts. I can only imagine Australian Aboriginal being one of the ghosts were there. If you haven't seen the British version, the group that created the show was an improv group. They're most of the ghosts. In fact, they play most of the ghosts. And one of them is a caveman, pre-Homo sapiens, like a Neanderthal, who is one of the funniest characters, actually. So definitely watch that. Tina, you can go to every Yankee game you want, regardless of whether it's at Yankee Stadium. You can just follow the team. That's one thing we seem to figure out based on what we've heard about an individual apparition appearing in different places. Yeah, and you could kind of every sporting event, every Comic-Con you ever wanted to go to. That's something I'll have to do when I'm gone too, is actually make sure I actually get to go to Comic-Con. All right, this has been a fun diversion, of course. Anybody else have a question or comment they want to make? Something else I can kind of move towards here. And I will mention, I'm just going to mention this mystery series again, mystery adventure series. It's The Adventures of Xana O'Savin. The first book in the series by Craig McDonald is called The Blood Ogre. There are two others. There's a fourth one coming out very soon. Really, when I read the first book, the whole thought form thing, it's embedded in the thing. In fact, the second one is called The Mothman Menace. So it's about Mothman, as still a Xana O'Savin story. Let's see, Paul, I thought I would be a ghost before my Cubs won the World Series. Yeah, that's true. Yeah. I know that was something people have been waiting for all their lives, having lived in the Chicago area for 4 years when I was in college. Yeah. The one thing I'll also throw to everybody, here's an interesting thing. Might as well just kind of toss some miscellaneous stuff out there right now, since I'm not getting questions right now. So during one of the sessions that my late friend Annette Martin, when she was alive, we were doing, occasionally do communication sessions with the ghost of the Blue Lady, of Kate at the Moss Beach Distillery. She would also, Annette would also do regular mediumship with the folks that were present as well. And in 2004, which is really kind of a benchmark for me, we did these with the lights on. It was right after dinner. We would have 25 people in the room, usually rearrange the table so everybody's kind of like in a U shape. And one of the attendees was a guy named Mark Pitta, who was former weather guy on a local TV station here in Oakland, and was also a stand-up comic. Still is a stand-up comic as far as I know. And Mark was there with somebody, and I was asking, Annette was channeling Kate, the Blue Lady, because Annette went into trance, and which was not usual, but it happened every once in a while, and Kate would speak through her. And we got some really interesting information from her. But Mark asked, what do you miss about being alive? And that was actually a good question. I mean, I think you have to consider asking apparitions normal questions too. And the response was sex and food, and which was a really funny response in some respects. But she has a good sense of humor. So the sex thing, we had a couple of jokes about that, related to my having experienced the ghost walking through me multiple times. And I can say it felt good. But the food thing, I actually had an idea. Way back in the 19th century, I'm going to give you a little background here. In the 19th century, people were fascinated by spiritualism and psychic stuff. And one of the games, parlor games they played, was kind of a taste-related ESP test. It wasn't called ESP at that point. And what they would do is they'd get a tray full of food samples and beverages, things that had smell and taste, in little cups or on little plates. And one person who was going to be the receiver would go out of the room, and then they would randomly select one of the foods. And this was done two ways. All right, so one would be to try to send to the receiver out of the room, or to give the tray to the person who was out of the room. There could be somebody else with them to confirm what was going on, randomly selecting a piece of food. The person would then smell it, look at it, smell it, and eat it or taste it slowly. So people would say mindfully. And then the people in the room, who are now all the receivers, would have to write down what they thought the food was that the person was tasting. And people would often get that right. I mean, think about this for a minute. We normally think about looking at things, but you can do ESP tests with hearing, with touch, with taste, with smell, all of those things. So my thought was, and I explained this to the ghost, that because she's communicating, picking up on people's consciousness, if she has a willing person who, while they're sitting and having dinner or lunch, could she connect with that person and experience the sense of taste? And that happened a few months later when I went in there with another psychic by the name of Ankasha Amenti. During lunchtime, she had already been in communication with Kate. She was a good friend of Annette's also. And during lunch, Kate was coming through her and picking up the taste. It was actually really an emotional lunch for her, and it was very emotional just watching what's going on. So you'll still be able to taste food. You may have to, leech from people what the taste is like, but it's still possible to have those experiences. Jody, do you think altered mental states like high fever, not drug-related hallucinating, or NDE increase psychic ability? They can. Well, certainly NDEs. People often report having an out-of-body experience when they've never had a psychic experience at all before. And when they come back from the experience, some people who've, again, never been psychic before, or reportedly never been psychic before, suddenly do have psychic ability. So that can definitely increase psychic ability. We have a lot of literature and research on altered states of consciousness and how different states of consciousness can affect psychic ability. Seemingly, the whole idea is that the altered state lets you get out of your own way. When we're fully conscious and in so-called normal state of consciousness, we categorize, we label, we second guess, we do all these logical and other things to explain stuff away, or we ignore experiences or information and things like that. So altered states can help you bypass a lot of that. Meditation seems to be one of the most correlated states of consciousness. I don't know about high fever, because a lot of times people, when they're having high fever, they're hallucinating, and it's really hard to get the information from them and for them to have psychic experiences. But the dream state is one of the most altered states of consciousness that has the most psychic activity to it. So that's definitely the case. Paul, there's a new book called Immortal Minds coming out next June. The author is a neuroscientist who believes in a soul. I put that on my Amazon list. Thanks, Paul, for the reference. And I'll pick it up when it's not coming out till June, but I've got it, pre-ordered, so I'll definitely pick it up. There's another book called Immortal Mind, and I think it's by Ernst Laszlo. So there are other books with that same title. You want to definitely look at one that's Immortal Minds, that talks about the soul in some respects. Just finished reading Sam Parnia's book Lucid Dying, Zenton's new book WTF, and Anthony Peake's new book. I picked up Anthony Peake's new book on near-death experiences. Thanks for the recommendation. And I have Liz's book. I'll have to pick up Sam Parnia's book as well. Yeah, there are plenty of good books out there. Someone I want to mention, actually, if you're interested in the history of ghost hunting, I think that what you want to do, in fact, I'll see if I can pull one of his books out here. It's not the one I was going to mention, but specifically. But if you look up in Amazon, a guy by the name of Tim Prossel, and here's one of his books. All right, this one is about newspaper accounts of ghosts and other things that he found doing research. He's a folklorist, but Prasil. So I know that looks like my name was blocking that, so I'm going to put in his name here. He also writes fiction. and he's written some, paranormal fiction as well. But he's got a book out on Victorian ghost hunters. So it's cases from the from the 1800s, the Victorian era. He's got another book out on pre-Victorian ghost investigations. And he has found the phrase ghost hunting as far back so far in the media and the press, as far back as the 1790s so far. So far. I suspect he will go back further with that. I know he's doing some more research that way. I follow him in a bunch of social media. But this book, Spectral Edition, is really interesting. It's ghost reports from U.S. newspapers, 1865 to 1917. There's another one called Ghosts in Print by another author, which is even bigger, that has all sorts of experiences reported in the press going back many, many years. I collect these kinds of books, really good, but I've got his other books, and it's really important to know because there's a lot of misinformation out there about ghost hunting that, number one, I have been called a pioneer of the paranormal, and it really bothers me because that would suggest that I'm over 100 years old. It's nice that people are recognizing me, but the reality is I had teachers, I had mentors, and they had mentors. And our field goes back officially to 1882. And before that, people were doing investigations. The London Ghost Club was doing investigations as far back as 1859. There are people who have been doing investigations. One of the first ghost investigations was by Artemidorus, which was 2,000 years ago in Greece. So this is not a new thing. In fact, the word poltergeist comes from the 16th century in Germany. It's important that we know history a little bit. I may have mentioned this before, but I was on a panel in 2008 at a convention in Pennsylvania run by the guys from Paranormal State. The panel included people from the TV show Ghost Hunters, Paranormal State, a couple of the investigators, some producers. Chip Coffey was on the panel, and so on. There were a whole bunch of people on the panel. And at one point, one of the two principals, and I'm going to say which one, from Ghost Hunters made the statement that there was no good literature on the subject before 1990. Subject of ghost hunting, investigations, and so on. At which point, I did something I never have done before, which is I interrupted a speaker because I was on the panel also. And basically said, that was not true. And I talked about the 100+ years before that, and then even mentioned that there is something called the Internet Archive, which I hope that you're all familiar with. It's archive.org. That has literature that's out of copyright from before 1926, I think it is now, or 27. So there are hundreds of books on ghosts, the paranormal, psychic experience. There's early journals from the SPR and the ASPR that are there. The stuff on the archive goes back well before the SPR. You can just have to do a little searching, try different keywords out as you're searching through that. I was getting kind of a blank stare from a couple of people on the panel, and an author sitting to the side of me, Michelle Belanger, spelled Belanger, confirmed that what I was saying was absolutely true. But it did not make me a favorite of many people in the audience who were fans of ghost hunters, because I kind of took down one of their people. But frankly, that was a stupid, stupid statement. I mean, if he had said 1890s, I would have let it go. But 1990s? I did not say this, but I wanted to. My first book came out in 1986. So anyway, Stephen, I saw Dean Radin quoted on saying that the best psychics get one right out of 3. Can you confirm that he made that? I don't know that he made that statement. I'm not sure where he made that statement. What batting average would give the best psychics? I think it depends on what their talents are and what they are trying to do. I mean, if they're predicting, if he's referring to predicting the future, then I'm surprised that it's 1 out of 3. I would be surprised to be 1 out of 3, because the best psychics happen to know that the future is not set in stone. It's probabilistic. 1 in 3, I think, is a conservative estimate. It's probably, in that case, predicting the future is probably more like a 1 in 10. Kind of like predicting the weather, which is a physical science, by the way. I think weather prediction will get better when they start applying AI to it, to all the data. So I don't know that. I'll have to look and see if Dean made that comment. Maybe I can send him an email and see if he did. He was probably trying to generalize. It really depends on, maybe it was 1 in 3 in one experiment he did. It's really, I've known psychics who are better at doing real-time stuff, but it depends on what you can consider a hit. Randy, thanks for posting that. Catherine Crowe wrote a wonderful book called The Night Side of Nature. It came out in 1848, the same year the Fox sisters were found and started spiritualism through their activity. The Night Side of Nature is available on Amazon. I do recommend it. She was a journalist. She did apply the scientific method to investigations and to checking out the reports. It is a very hefty volume with a lot of really good experiences that she checked out, and some others that were just reported. So I do highly recommend it. I think that she's kind of, she started the real ball rolling at collecting actual experiences from people in many respects. So she often doesn't get enough credit for being kind of like kickstarting a lot of things back then. So thanks for posting that, Randy. All right, let's see here. All right, we're coming down to the wire. We only got a few minutes left. I'm going to mention again, put in the Rhine Research Center's website. You'll find there information about the lecture I'm giving this Friday night. It is going to be on Zoom, or if you happen to be in the Durham, North Carolina, general Raleigh-Durham area, feel free to check out how to come yourself. It'd be great to have. We are going to have some people in the library. I think we're limited to 25 people, but it would be great to actually have people with me, especially since I'm going to be doing a little magic in the talks. The talk is about magic and magicians, and parapsychology, and there'll be a little magic. Now, I'm not going to do a full show, certainly, but I'm going to do a few things during that time. So anyway, I hope that some of you do make it. It will be recorded, but it's going to be a while before the recording goes up. Typically, it takes them a while, partly because the platform the Rhine was using, something happened with it, and we're looking for another home for the videos, which all have to be uploaded. Well, that's it for me tonight. Everybody take care. The next session is going to be in 2 weeks on the 24th, so it's going to be the Sunday before Thanksgiving. I hope to see you all here. Please do tell your friends, like and subscribe. Tell your friends about all the recordings that are going back over a year. And we'll see you. Hopefully see you on Friday night, or you'll see me. Otherwise, we'll see you in a couple of weeks. Good night.